Hi, welcome to Light Camera Author. I'm Jim Juno, and this is the podcast where we talk with authors who write books about Hollywood and entertainment. And I have with me tonight a gentleman. He is got a new book. He has a new book out. It's called Hollywood Pride, a celebration of LGBTQ representation and perseverance in film. Alonso, forgive me if I mispronounce your last name, Duralde.
Yes, great.
Alonso Duralde. Great, thank you. You can, mine is Juno, just in case, because it looks weird, But your new book, Hollywood Pride, I'll be honest, I knew from my research and everything that there were like that homosexuals and LGBTQ community were represented all the way back until the early days of cinema.
Mhm.
But I didn't know it went all the way back to the Dickerson sound experimental film.
Well, again, we don't the what you're referring to is a lot of people have seen it. It's the two men dancing together while someone else is playing the violin. We don't know anything about the personal lives of the men in the film, apart from Dickinson himself is the guy playing the violin. The other two guys were just employees at the Edison laboratory. But it is, I think, interesting and carries a real weight that one of the very first moving picture images that existed in the world and that persists today that we still see is of two men in an embrace dancing together.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that, like you said, it book in your book, it bookends the beginning and then up to modern day.
Mhm.
And a lot that has happened within the 129 years in between. Um, and it's got a lot of my favorite movies in it, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Some of them I didn't make the association with the LGBTQ community until I read your book. Some I did. You're speaking to a person who's seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show 56 times, you know?
So an American, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
as an American. And but Pandora's Box was one of my favorite silent movies with Louise Brooks.
Yeah.
And and I had forgotten until I read your book that yes, there is a lesbian character in there. Now it was discreetly done in most
Um,
cases.
I mean, yeah, in the case of Pandora's Box, it was right out there in the original version, but different censors would get their hands on things, and of course, with silent films, you change the intertitles, and it changes everything. So there were a lot
Mhm.
of sort of cleaned up or bowdlerized versions of that one floating around, and then it really wasn't until Pabst got to release his kind of definitive cut decades later that that film really kind of entered the pantheon as one of the great films to come out of the silent era.
And a lot of it was pre-code or known as the pre-code era.
Hmm.
Before the Hayes Code or the Breen Code, whoever you want to credit it to, um, because that's when it really became forced into the closet, so to speak.
Yeah, there was definitely a crackdown once the code comes into play, where the studios have all agreed that they're going to abide by this list of rules, one of which being was no sex perversion. That was the sort of umbrella term they used to offer anything that was kind of, non-heteronormative. But why, I think there wasn't probably as much queer content in the pre-code era as you might imagine. I mean, they didn't exactly. Like you'd get
Mhm.
some supporting characters popping up here and there. And then once the code comes in, it really just kind of it forces everybody to be more clever about it. So it's not like queer people suddenly disappear from movies. You just have to know where to look for them. So if you see, one of Edward Everett Horton's kind of, henpecked husbands in a Fred Astaire musical, or, Peter Lorre's Joel Cairo in The Maltese Falcon, if you know
Mhm.
what you're looking for, the clues are there. But movies just had to get a lot more discreet and subtle about presenting that stuff, but we never went away entirely. And then certainly behind the scenes, we've always been there. There was definitely more of a pressure on uh people in the industry to, you should get married, or you ladies should stop wearing slacks in public. But that was just a kind of an issue of sort of playing the game with the political climate that was happening at that time.
It's fascinating you say that because that leads me into my next question. One of my favorite stories in Hollywood is William Haynes.
Yes.
And now was it a Cone of Columbia? Was it a?
No, it was I think it was Louis Mayer.
Louis B. Mayer. Yeah,
Yeah,
and William Haynes was unabashedly and open in an era where men were not open homosexuals.
yeah,
We're talking late 19 teens, 1920s.
right.
And he made no bones about it. He goes, I'm gay. I have a husband, so to speak, even though they couldn't get married in that era.
Hmm.
Jimmy Shields
Yes.
and Louis B. Mayer said, you've got to get married to a woman, drop Jimmy, and or else your career is over. And to his credit, Shields said, I'd rather not
Haynes.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Haynes. Haynes said it. Yes.
Yeah, and I find with a lot of the figures that appear in the book, like there are sort of differing takes on things. Like, William Mann's Wisecracker, I think, very extensively gets into the idea of Haynes being sort of a somebody who walks away from the industry when they try to force him in the closet. There are other accounts that are more like, well, he was a juvenile lead. He played a lot of, like college boys who sort of learn their learn to be team players by the end of the movie. And he was kind of aging out of that. And so he was going to leave the industry anyway. But what's fascinating about Haynes, either version, he and Jimmy Shields, Haynes stays in Los Angeles, becomes a very successful and in demand interior decorator for the likes of his friend Joan Crawford and other people. He and Shields become kind of the only male couple to be sort of open and accepted as such in Hollywood society. So even after he's no longer a contract player with Mayer, he will attend, dinners at, the Thalberg's house or whatever. And he and Jimmy arrive as a couple, are treated as a couple. Like there's no bones about it. There's no, it's not like Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins, taking starlets out for a date and, posing for publicity photos and then going home together afterwards. Like Haynes and Shields were like, yeah, this is us. That very cloistered and mostly conservative world, conservative at least in terms of queer visibility, seemed to be fine with it.
And I believe it was Joan Crawford who called their relationship the happiest marriage in Hollywood, I believe.
I think that is yeah, that's her take, and I think she would know.
And after that time, um, I'm trying to remember in your book which came first, what you call the Pansy era
The pansy
or the
craze, yeah.
Pansy craze. I'm sorry, the Pansy craze, like people like Marlene Dietrich.
It's they're kind of side by side. The pansy craze is happening right before the code is really kicking in, partially just because there are these queer nightclubs in Los Angeles that are the only places where you can get liquor, because prohibition is still in effect, and so they become very popular. But you have like big stars and even sort of studio heads going to see these drag performances and other things that were happening at these clubs. And then Dietrich is coming out of Weimar era Berlin, where she is very much connected with that city's queer underground and drag clubs and that kind of thing. And she's working out at boxing gyms and wearing pants and carving her own way as this sort of androgynous superstar where she will play around with Joseph von Sternberg will put her in these movies where she's wearing these insanely femi flouncy Travis Banton creations, but then she'll turn around and put on the tuxedo for Morocco and like send everybody into a tizzy. So
Especially when
yeah,
she kisses that woman.
absolutely, yeah. And I mean, yeah, she's doing it to turn on Gary Cooper,
Mhm.
but it's still that moment is happening and it's in the film, and these are all things that the code is just going to eliminate.
And I was going to ask you too. I mean, you mentioned that you say the code at one point it may have been better when it was hidden in your.
Well, yeah, the joke is that maybe Hidden was better because what happens is the code ends in the 1960s. You have these filmmakers who now have this freedom to depict LGBTQ plus characters and situations, but those filmmakers are all like pretty much to a person, white, straight, cis men.
Mhm.
And so what that means is, okay, great, we can now give you these really terrible, these queer characters who are either the butt of jokes or they're to be feared, or they are miserable and suicidal. So it's a double-edged sword. Yay, we're in movies. Oh no, we're in movies like this. You get these movies like The Sergeant, where poor Rod Steiger is so in love with John Philip Law, and when he finally gets drunk one night and kisses him, there's nothing left for him to do but go in the woods and shoot himself. It's like, maybe we could have the code instead. I don't, like these
Yes.
are the choices.
You had more creative. You had to be more creative when the
Right.
code
And
was in.
and I think there's a lot less hostility towards queer people when we're just sort of appearing in the margins. But again, these are all sort of necessary steps to get us to the places where we wind up going. So, you have to endure this period of like the 60s and early 70s where like all of these queer characters are just sort of embarrassing stereotypes or monstrous or whatever. But then, things start getting better as, queer filmmakers rise to the fore, obviously, but then also just, our general presence in the culture becomes more visible, and it becomes less acceptable to create these characters that are so sort of two-dimensional and ill thought out, let's say.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about Marlene Dietrich coming from the Weimar Republic.
Mhm.
Um, was it more acceptable over in Europe during this time to be gay?
It depends on where you were. I mean, I think like the Weimar era was sort of famously progressive, and you have, Magnus Hirschfeld doing some of the first real kind of academic studies of sexuality and of queer lives and of trans lives. Then, of course, you have the Nazis coming in and destroying his archives and burning it all to the ground, and taking a hard shift to the right. So yeah, it kind of varies on where you were. Like France, yes. Spain under Franco, no. There's not one big kind of encompassing thing.
You also mentioned during World War II,
Mhm.
um, and I guess during World War One, also World War One films, because I remember Wings had the famous men on man kiss.
Yeah, although what I find fascinating about Wings is that it comes from a period in which homosexuality was so removed from the general culture and the conversation that straight men felt comfortable being affectionate to each other, and it never crossed their mind that, oh no, this is going to be interpreted as something gay. So you have the heroes of Wings, these like, manly World War I fighter pilots, like, hugging and kissing and crying on each other. And it's an unabashed masculinity that people are not going to, within about 10 years, are going to be so afraid of. That idea of being able to express emotions that way, to express affections, in a platonic setting for another man, goes away. So that kiss in Wings is a whole other thing, but it is nonetheless culturally significant because it reflects an attitude that would disappear as gay men got terrified, or sorry, as straight men rather, got terrified of being branded as queer.
Oh, exactly, and that lasts up until today.
Oh yeah.
Um, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but because I want to, I mean, because obviously today it still goes on. The closet is still there, and
The closet happens, but I think also, like straight men are sort of slowly coming around to this idea of like, you know what, I can hug my friend, I can touch my friend, and it's not going to be a thing that anybody has to interpret in a certain way. And I think that really messed up straight guys. I mean, the poor dears, but I mean, for decades, really, I think the panic about being perceived as gay really messed up men's friendships. And you have that thing of like guys who punch each other because it's the only societally sanctioned way for them to touch each other. I hope that we're moving away from that paradigm, and that straight men can be comfortable with each other and not have to like fall back on the old no homo or whatever.
yeah, and even going through the time, I mean, you had people like who, even though she wasn't gay, Katharine Hepburn,
Hmm.
showing a real masculinity, with her portrayal of, like, she always wore pants,
Right.
But even though she dated men and stuff, but
I'm not going to say Katharine Hepburn wasn't gay. I'm also not
uh,
going to say she was.
okay,
That's one of those historical debates that rages forever, and frankly, we'll never know.
exactly.
But yes, in terms of her like public appearance, she was definitely a pioneer in being like, you know what, I'm wearing pants that are comfortable. And if you don't like it, too bad. And actually, even though the movie was a flop at the time, one of her most fascinating film roles in that regard is Sylvia Scarlett, where
Mhm.
she spends the entire movie in boy drag and like puts sets off everybody, like men, women, everybody around her into this sexual frenzy where like they don't quite know what it is about him that they find so fascinating, but they're like every character in the movie wants to cuddle or something, with that character, with Hepburn, with short hair and wearing trousers.
It sounds like 50 years later, you go through it again with Victoria,
Right. And Yentl,
and
like
Yentl.
I think movies have always been, kind of fascinated in gender and what the limits of gender are and how we express it. And, a lot of movies do it in a really stupid way. And it's just sort of like an easy gag, like, oh, we'll put a man in a dress. It'll be hilarious. But you have these movies along the way that I think really explore it in a fascinating way. Like one of the things I love about Some Like It Hot is that while it is this knockabout farce and it's mostly about Cary Grant trying to, or it's not Cary Grant, sorry, Tony Curtis
Tony
using
Curtis.
his Cary Grant voice to seduce Marilyn Monroe. Jack Lemmon has a fascinating arc in that movie because originally the idea is like, Joe and Jerry are going to be Josephine and Geraldine, and it's Josephine and Daphne. When they show up at the train, Jack Lemmon introduces himself as Daphne, and Daphne is a whole other person. Josephine is Joe in a girdle and a wig. Daphne is another creation entirely and has this odd sense of agency by the end of the movie where like Jerry's able to pour a lot of himself into Daphne in a way that he clearly had always wanted to and never felt comfortable doing so before, in the same way that when in Yentl, like the dressing as a boy allows this woman entry to a world that was barred to her and allows her to be taken seriously by other men as a scholar, as somebody who is studying the Torah, that being a woman would never have allowed. So I find those movies most interesting when the sort of disguise kind of taps into something that's been there all along that the person has never been able to express before, but suddenly by slipping into this other outfit, that emerges and that becomes part of themselves, and it's not just a caricature, it's not just a disguise, it's this sort of permission to be to tap into this other part of yourself.
I remember in the 80s, mid 80s, maybe late 80s, the shock and that the general public had because Rock Hudson had
Right.
AIDS.
Right.
And like Rock Hudson's gay, and it was like it really sent shockwaves through Hollywood and through the movie industry.
Yeah.
But it was something which to me I was like, well, I mean, yes, he has a horrible disease. Whether or not he's gay or not is irrelevant. So
Well,
hopefully it changed.
I mean, it was a 1-2 punch, I think, for people who were unaware of these things of like this icon of masculinity of He-Man, sort of leading man stardom, is a gay, and then on top of it, this guy who I have loved and enjoyed seeing in movies and respected over the course of my life has this disease that I have previously only associated with people who don't matter and who don't have family or friends or import in society. So I think for a lot of people there was this shock of like, oh, AIDS isn't just a thing that happens to them, it happens to people I care about. It happened to Rock Hudson. And also the idea that like, oh, I thought I knew what a gay guy looked like. I thought I knew what a gay guy acted like, that I'd spot him from a mile away. Rock Hudson, that strapping young man, that virile masculine icon of the 1950s. And so, that makes people have to sort of rethink their parameters or rethink what they've assumed to be truths about a given subject.
And he was a victim as much as anybody because he was forced to be married, forced to get
Yep.
married to a woman, had to have a lavender marriage, and that's what they called it during those days.
Yeah,
Um,
by his agent, he was forced to marry his agent's like receptionist.
yes, Phyllis
Um,
Gates, I believe her name was something like that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And Henry Wilson was the guy who had molded Rock and Tab Hunter and a lot of the other sort of beefcake icons of that era. But Rock was definitely the biggest star, in his clientele. But yeah, so I think Rock Hudson had he had a life where he had relationships and he had close friends, and it wasn't like we think of the closet as being this sort of like, constant, you're a spy behind enemy lines. But if you're in Hollywood, like, there is the face that you give to the public and that you give to the press and what you allow people in. And then there's the closed private circle of, these are my intimates and this is how I live my life. I'm not defending the closet. It was despicable and continues to be. But I think Hudson, did find a lot of joy in his life, and I think that he was, I think as tragic as the end of his life was, I think he found some, you know, catharsis in getting to come out of the closet before he died and being like, this is who I am, this is who I've always been. When you saw me in Giant, when you saw me in, Pillow Talk, whatever, like I've always been this guy.
Now, also in your book, you mention in one of the later chapters before Brokeback and after Brokeback.
Yes.
And we're talking about Brokeback Mountain. Tell me what that movie did to change the perception.
Well, I mean, as with most sort of moments in art, it's rare that there's sort of like this one lightning bolt thing that changes everything. Like Brokeback is part of a process that we'd been seeing unfolding at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. You were already at that point where playing gay roles was no longer a thing that actors were afraid to do. Like gay actors might still be because they don't, would bring up rumors they didn't feel like discussing. But, starting with about William Hurt in Kiss of the Spider Woman, straight actors realized that gay roles were a good way to sort of like get taken seriously as an actor, get considered for awards, and so by the time Brokeback rolls around, like it's attracting like these very A-list stars and a very big, successful, acclaimed director. Um, and then the film itself, I think, had a huge impact in terms of, I would say that anecdotally, that for a lot of straight Americans, it was quite possibly the first, gay movie they'd ever gone to see. And, I kind of liken it to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which when it came out was for a lot of white Americans, the first understanding they had of what slavery was and how it worked and what it did to people. And I'm not equating these things, but I think that when people saw Brokeback Mountain, it made them sort of rethink, what homophobia does to people and the horrible impact it can have on people's lives and the tragedy that it can cause when two people who are in love with each other and the only thing that's keeping them apart is society. And everybody who is part of creating that society, of part of creating that idea of, oh, guys like that, we got to drag them out and shoot them. I think for a lot of people who were, grappling with their own homophobia, that movie might have been the first step towards them having a broader understanding of the subject and a broader understanding of what it means when you decide that somebody else is less than human or is less than deserving of the happiness that you enjoy. So even though it didn't prompt the floodgate of sort of, you know, it's not like Jaws, where every studio then had to rush some kind of ocean, horror movie into production. It didn't spawn a bunch of knockoff, queer romances, but I think that it showed that a movie on this subject matter could attract top talent, could make its money back and could, like win a wheelbarrow full of awards. And that I think, and then it becomes the next step for the other films down the line that are taking it further. So it is one step of many in an ongoing path, but it's an important step.
Now, I was wondering, what is your feeling when you hear some people saying that, straight actors playing gay roles, well, maybe you should have a gay actor playing gay roles.
I mean, that's a tricky one. I absolutely believe that trans roles should be played by trans actors.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a sorrowful history there, and I think that we need to do better. Um, you know, I would prefer that gay actors play straight roles mainly because I want gay actors to get work. And a lot of times, actors who come out are then told, well, I don't know if audiences are going to buy you as a straight guy, even though you've got like Neil Patrick Harris on, How I Met Your Mother, and countless examples of actors who've come out and can still play, romantic heterosexual leads on film. So if you're going to tell gay actors we're not really buying you in straight roles, then you better be casting them in gay roles, because then what else are they going to do? What other work are they going to find?
That's true. Now, I know attitudes have changed from 125 years ago, and
Mm,
even from 50 years ago.
yeah.
Um, so how much has it changed, let's say, in the last 10 to 20 years?
I mean, what I think we're seeing now is definitely a rise of trans storytellers. I think they are getting access to budgets and to getting to make films in a way that we haven't really seen before. I mean, there have been trans filmmakers obviously all along, and there are some important trans features starting the 90s or so. But I mean, like, if you look right now, in theaters, you have The People's Joker and I Saw the TV Glow, which are two really essential films, and I think represent kind of a new wave that we're going to be seeing, akin to the new queer cinema of the early 90s, but that's going to be very specifically about trans filmmakers telling trans stories. So that's evolving. I think we're seeing more queer filmmakers of color in the when the new queer cinema happened, it was kind of Cheryl Dunye was the first black lesbian to direct a feature film, but she was kind of one of the few filmmakers of color in that movement in the early 90s. But since then, obviously, we've had Justin Simeon and a lot more from all Wanuri Kahiu from Africa, like a lot of filmmakers who've been emerging from different parts of the industry. Yeah, I think it's like I said, this is an ever evolving story that is in no way done. I had to I had to stop because you have to turn the copy in at some point. But this is I got us as far as I could, but the story itself goes on.
Well, fantastic. Well, the book is Hollywood Pride, a celebration of LGBTQ representation and perseverance in film. The author is Alonso Duralde, and this is published by Running Press. It's part of Turner Classic Movies Library, and you can find it at tcm.com. And Alonso, I really appreciate you taking time tonight on Lights Camera Author.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I hope people enjoy the book.